We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Dalet Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 64a. And the previous summit, the Gemara said that Rabbi Yishmael wants to minimize the amount of Chilul Shabbos by the Omer, and therefore by the Omer it's just going to be 3 saw of barley that is supposed to be harvested and processed in order to get the fine barley flour for the Omer. Again, that's in order to minimize the amount of Chilul Shabbos. It's better to do more malacha of just one malacha than doing more of many malachas. That's what the Gemara said. And the Gemara said that Rabbi Yishmael seems to hold like Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, because Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, he says on Pesach, with regards to the Korban Pesach, let's say the 14th of Nisan falls out on Shabbos, and so the Korban Pesach is being brought on Shabbos. In such a situation, you should only fillet the Korban Pesach ad hechazeh until the breast, and not the entire way, just what you need in order to get to the sacrificial portions. That also represents minimizing the amount of Chilul Shabbos. But the Gemara in the previous Amud said it's not necessarily the case, because in this situation of the Korban Pesach, there is a bizayon kachim, it's a disgrace to the kachim, and so maybe Rabbi Yishmael would not agree in that case when there's bizayon kachim. Maybe Ema Karabanan Svirle, one might say that he holds like the Rabbanan. It's not necessarily that he holds like Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. And the Gemara continues, Inami, or we can argue as follows. Adkan lo kam Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka hasam. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, only said over there that we flay the animal until the chazeh. Eladi is avid late tzorech gavoa v'lo tzorech achule Shabbos. That's only where the tzorech gavo was already taken care of, and there's no need to desecrate the Shabbos. Avalacha, but over here, delo is avid late tzorech gavo, where the tzorech gavo has not yet been accomplished, v'tzorech lachule Shabbos, and there's a need to desecrate Shabbos. So ema karabanan svirle. So then one might say that he holds like the Rabbanan, again, that one does not need to minimize in terms of the Chilul Shabbos when bringing the Omer. And Rashi explains, Aval Gabe Omer, but by the Omer, Delo Esavid Tzorech Gavoa. There, the Tzorech Gavoa is not accomplished in the same fashion as by the Korban Pesach. By Korban Pesach, if one flays the animal until the Chazah, it fully accomplishes the Tzorech Gavoa. That's why Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says that that is what you should do, and there should be no more Chilul Shabbos. But by the Omer, that's not true. Kedamrin and Leil, like we said earlier, according to Rabbi Yishmael, if you process the 5 saw, that's better than processing just 3 saw. And so therefore, in this situation, it could be that Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka really holds like the Rabbanan, the Amri, that they say fundamentally, the Shabbos of Dinon, kol ma de boile kibechol. They say on Shabbos you do whatever you would do on the weekday. Whatever processing is done on the weekday, that's what should be done on Shabbos, according to the Rabbanan. Now it happens to be that the Rabbanan hold it's always 3 saw, whether the weekday, whether Shabbos, because that's all that is needed. But the point is, they don't make that distinction. If you have a boy tvei of Dinon, if one needed more, let's say more processing was needed, then they would do more processing. And so therefore, again, it's possible Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka does not agree with Rabbi Yishmael in our Mishnah. And so the Gemara continues instead and says, Elo my Rabba, rather Rabba says, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKohanim Amru Davarecha. Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKohanim also in our Mishnah, they say the same thing. The Tanan, as we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKohanim Omer, Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKohanim says, B'Shabbos Nixor B'Yochid B'Magal Echad of Kuba Achas. On Shabbos, the Omer is harvested by one person with one sickle, with one basket, Uvechol, and then on the weekday, B'Shlosha, B'Shalosh Kupos, of B'Shalosh Magalos, with 3 people, with 3 baskets, with 3 sickles. The Chachamim say Echad Shabbos v'Echad Chol, whether on Shabbos, whether on the weekday, we do not make a distinction. B'Shalosh Kupos of B'Shalosh Magalos, it's always going to be 3 baskets, it's always going to be 3 sickles. So Mi Lo Kamer Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKohanim Hasam, doesn't Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKohanim, doesn't he say over there, Kevon de Efshar Lo Tarchinan, since it's possible to do it with less people, so Lo Tarchinan, we're not going to do more, we're going to try to minimize the amount of Chilul Shabbos. So Hachanami here also, Kevin de Efshar Lo Tarchinan, since it's possible to do it in a way that minimizes the Chilul Shabbos, so we're not going to do more. Again, we're going to try to minimize the Chilul Shabbos. But the Gemara continues and says, Mimai, how do you know you should compare again the 2 opinions? Dilma adkan lo kam Rabbi Yishmael hacha. Maybe Rabbi Yishmael only says it over here in terms of the amount that you do 3 saw instead of 5 saw. That's ela deleka pirsume milsa. That's in a situation where there's no pirsume milsa, there's no issue of publicizing. Aval hasam over there, when it comes comes to something which is relevant to publicizing, the Ika Persume Milsa, where you have this concept of Persume Milsa, so then Ema Karabonan Svirle, I might say that he holds like the Rabbanan. Again, the Chachamim say, whether Shabbos, whether Chol, it's Shalosh Kupas, Shalosh Magolas, and Shlosha with 3 people, because again, the idea is you want to publicize it. Inami or, Adkan Lo Kamer, Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim Hasam, Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim, he only says it over there, the I Bechad, I Beshlosha, Tzorach Gavoa Mesavid, because over there, whether it's done with 1 person, whether it's done with 3 people, but the Tzorach Gavoa is still going to be accomplished in either case. Nothing is going to be lacking in terms of what needs to be accomplished. It's Mesavid Kilcha, so it's going to be taken care of according to the proper halacha. Aval Hacha, but over here, the lowest Avid Kilcha, so Tzorach Gavoa here, where we're talking about the amount of saw, so you're not necessarily fulfilling the Tzorach Gavoa in the best possible way, and so therefore, Ema Karabonan Svirle, I might say that he holds like the Rabbanan, that on Shabbos you should do it in the same fashion as on the weekday. And Rashi explains, Aval Hasan, but over there, Milse Rabbi Chanina, that which Rabbi Chanina says, the Ika Pirsume Milse, there you have an issue of publicizing it. B'shlosha b'nei adam tfei b'yachid, if 3 people do it, it's going to be more public than 1 person. So Ema Rabbi Yishmael, K'Rabbanan Svirle, I might say that Rabbi Yishmael holds like the Rabbanan. V'yav dinan b'shlosha, we should do with 3 people, a farsim hadavar, that we want to publicize it. What do we want to publicize? Shaksira so Omer b'matzoi tesvav b'Nisan, that the harvesting of the Omer is on Matzoi of the 15th of Nisan, after the 15th of Nisan, the day after, Mimnei HaBaitusim, and that's why do we want to publicize that? Because we want to show not like the Baitusim, Sha'omrim Ein HaOmer Bo Ela Becher B'Shabbos. They say the Omer comes only on a Sunday. The reason they say that is because the pasuk says Mimachar As HaShabbos. They take that literally, it means Shabbos, and so therefore it comes on a Sunday. But again, we hold that Shabbos refers to Tesvav B'Nisan, the first day of Pesach, the 15th of Nisan, and therefore it's the next day, the 16th of Nisan, that the Omer is brought, and we want to publicize that. Aval Hacha, but over here, Lagabe Shalosh sign in terms of how much saw to use. Lo Esavid Tzorach Gavoa Kel Chasu Ali B'Rabbi Yishmael. Again, according to Rabbi Yishmael, you're not fully fulfilling the Tzorach Gavoa to Kamer B'Chamish V'Cha Milsa, because Rabbi Yishmael holds 5 saw would be better, and he's only doing 3 saw on Shabbos. So maybe Rabbi Chanina Skana Kohanim does not hold like Rabbi Yishmael. And so the Gemara continues instead and says, El Amar Ravashi, rather Ravashi says, Rabbi Yishmael v'Rabbi Yossi Amru Davar Echad. Rabbi Yishmael in our Mishnah and Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, they say the same thing. Again, the idea to minimize the Chilul Shabbos. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Meseches Rosh Hashanah, Bein Shenira Be'olil Uvein Shalonira Be'olil. This is talking about the new moon of the beginning of the month, whether it is seen clearly or whether it is not seen clearly. Mechalin Olaves HaShabbos. The witnesses are allowed to desecrate Shabbos in order to travel and testify about the new moon. It does not matter if they see the new moon, even if they know that others probably saw it, but they can be Mechalel Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Im Nira Be'olil, if it's seen clearly, Ein Mechal in all of us HaShabbos, then they shouldn't be Mechal Shabbos, because certainly other witnesses will come, they won't be needed, and therefore they should not be Mechal Shabbos in such a situation. And so the Gemara says, Milo Amar Rabbi Yossi Hasam, doesn't Rabbi Yossi say over there, Kevon de'efshar lo tarchinan, since it's possible, we shouldn't take the effort and desecrate Shabbos. In other words, in this case, we should minimize the Chil Shabbos. It's possible a different way. So Hachanami, so here also he would say the same thing, Kevon de'efshar lo tarchinan, if it's possible to do it with less Chil Shabbos, so we don't exert ourselves more than that. Again, Rabbi Yossi seems to be the same as Rabbi Yishmael. And again, the Gemara questions this, Mimai, how do you know it's really the same? Dilma adkan lo kam Rabbi Yishmael hacha, maybe Rabbi Yishmael only says it over here. Rabbi Yishmael says, in a situation, again, of 3 saw, 5 saw, so Rabbi Yishmael says 1 should do less on Shabbos. Why? Ela deleko nimsasata machshil and lost level, because there's no concern that it's going to cause a stumbling block in the future. Aval Hasan, but over there, if one were to follow Rabbi Yossi, and only in a situation where the moon would be visible not so clearly, but if it's clear, then you shouldn't be Mechal Shabbos. If one followed that, the nimsasata machshil and la'asid lavo, that could cause a stumbling block in the future, so it's a reason not to follow Rabbi Yossi. And so Ema K'Rabbanan Svirle, so I might say that Rabbi Yishmael really holds like the Rabbanan. And we can go the other way as well. Inami or Adkan lo Kamer Rabbi Yossi Hasam. Rabbi Yossi only said it over there that there should be a minimization of Chil Shabbos, Ela Deleka Tzorach Gavoa, because again over there is no Tzorach Gavoa. There's nothing really being gained. Below Nitna Shabbos Litchos, it's not a reason to push off Shabbos. You have a reason to minimize. But again, Aval Hacha, but over here, the Ika Tzorach Gavoa, where there is a Tzorach Gavoa, in other words, there is something that needs to be taken care of, that could be taken care of at a higher level. V'nitna Shabbos Lidchos, and Shabbos is already allowed to be pushed off for this. So Ema K'Rabbanan Svirle, so I might say, again, that he holds like the Rabbanan, that in terms of the amount of saw, you should not treat Shabbos any differently than the weekday. And Rashi explains, Bein shenira halavana ba'aliyah lelechol ha'olam, whether the moon is seen very clearly to everyone. And Rabbi Yossi makes a distinction, Im nira ba'aliyah ein mechalin olav es haShabbos. If it's clear, then we're not mechal Shabbos, lo leches u'lahoid lebezin, to go and to testify in court. Sharei ein sarach, is not necessary. Kevin devalil nira bezin amiru, since it's so clear, bezin themselves even saw it. There's no need. And then the Gemara said, Aval hasam gabe levana, when it comes to the moon, di'ika machshil and lasad lavo, there's a different concern, and that is a stumbling block in the future. That's a concern specifically with what Rabbi Yossi is advocating. The zimnan de lo yirabolil, because if you're going to follow Rabbi Yossi, sometimes it won't be clear. But then v'yomru ha'idim, but the witnesses will say, kemo sherinu anu kainru bezin, they'll make the same argument. If we saw it, then bezin also saw it. V'lo nechal Shabbos, and they'll decide not to desecrate Shabbos then, when they really should be desecrating Shabbos. V'ika michshol, and that's a stumbling block, because the new month is not going to be established in the proper way. The leka tzorech gavoa, again, where there is no tzorech gavoa, that's talking about by the new moon. There ain't no carbon, that's not even a situation of a carbon. There is no real reason to push off Shabbos. But again, but over here, the tzorech gavoa, there is a tzorech gavoa. The v'chamesh v'chamil says, we said with 5 so it's better. V'nitna Shabbos lidchos eitzel hagimel son, and we're already pushing off Shabbos for at least 3 so. Umigo de nidchem ibnei hagimel nidches nami eitzel hachamish. Once you're pushing off for 3, then maybe push off also for 5. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated, Shachat shtei chatos shel tzibur, if he slaughters 2 chatos that are communal chatos, ve'eno tzarech el achas, but he only needs 1 of them. The case over here is that 2 animals were designated to be the communal chatos, but really only 1 is needed to be brought, only 1 would override Shabbos, but he slaughtered the both of them. So Amar Rabba v'temer Rabbi Ami, Rabba says, and some say Rabbi Ami says, Chayev al hashniya, so on the second one he's liable, because that one was not needed. When he slaughtered that, it was not needed as a communal offering. Upater al harishon, and he's exempt on the first one, because of the first one, it is needed, and therefore he's exempt. That does override Shabbos. And the Gemara continues and says, Va'afilu nischaper lo b'shniya. Now this is true, even if the ultimate kapara is with the second one. Let's say the first one, he doesn't end up using that for the kapara, maybe the blood spilled or something along those lines, and he ends up using the second one for the kapara, but still he's liable, because at the time that he slaughtered the second one, that was not really needed. Va'afilu nimtzas rishona kechusha, and even if the first one is found to be kechusha, which means it's a lean animal, it's not the most appropriate animal to be used as an offering, and so again, there would be a reason then to use the second animal, but still, he's liable again on the second animal. And the Gemara continues and says, Umi Omar Rabba Hachi, does Rabba really say this? Does he really say that in both of these situations, Afilo Nischaper lo b'shniya, Afilo Nimsas Rishona Kechusha, that he's going to be liable on the second animal? V'ha'omar Rabba, but Rabba said, and this question specifically is with regard to the Kechusha situation, Rabba said, Hayu lafanav shtei chatos, one has in front of him 2 chatos, Achas shemeina v'achas Kechusha, one is fat, and one is lean. The lean one, again, it's not the most appropriate that should be used. So shachat shmeina v'yachar kach shachat kechusha, if he slaughters the fat one and then he slaughters the lean one, so then chayiv, then he's liable, because again, the lean one is totally not needed. But kechusha, if he slaughters the lean one, v'yachar kach shmeina, and then the fat one pater, he's going to be exempt, because we really prefer the shmeina. V'lood, not only that, ela sha'omrim lo, we actually would say to him, have shmeina lechatchila v'shachat, go get the shmeina, bring the shmeina lechatchila, and slaughter that one. We don't want the offering of the kechusha, and so therefore in a situation of kechusha, really we should say that the fact that the first animal was kechusha renders it that we really do prefer the second animal, and there should be no liability. That seems to be what Rabba is saying. And the Gemara continues and answers, if you want, we could say, Sami kechusha mikamaisa, in that first statement of Rabba v'temer Rabbi Ami, so it does say, Va'afilu nischaper lo b'shniya. That's true. Even though there's a kapara from the second animal, still there's going to be a liability for slaughtering that second animal. But the next line of Afilu Nimsas Rishona Kechusha, if the Rishona is Kechusha, there's liability on the second animal. That's not true. We should remove that line. Rabba never said that. That's one answer. Again, Sami Kechusha Mikamaisa, remove the Kechusha phrase, the Kechusha line from that first statement. Viba is saying, if you want, we could say, in order to answer the contradiction, Hahi Rabbi Ami Omra, that statement really was Rabbi Ami and it wasn't Rabba. Again, in the statement above, it said, Omar Rabba v'itema Rabbi Ami. Rabba said, and some have a version Rabbi Ami. And the question discussion over here was a contradiction, Rabbah against Rabbah. So if we simply say the first statement was Rabbi Ami, then we have no contradiction. In other words, the two statements do contradict one another, but they were made by different individuals. The first statement was made by Rabbi Ami, and the second statement was made by Rabbah. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Ravina le Ravashi. Ravina said to Ravashi, Nimtzas harishona kachusha b'vnei me'ayin ma. What if we find out that the first one is a kachusha? We find out it's lean, but it wasn't something that was recognizable. It's b'vnei me'ayin. It's in the intestines. It's within the animal. So then what would be the halacha? Because in this situation, the person really had no way of knowing. So if we're assuming that kachusha is a reason not to be liable on the shmeina, but that might only be when you know that it's a kachusha. But if you find that out later, maybe that's not going to help. Meaning, basar machshavto azlinan. Do we follow the person's intention? V'gavra lisur kamachav, and this person had no idea that it was kachusha. So whatever he was intending with that animal that was the shmeina, he was thinking to do something that was aser, that was prohibited. He didn't know that ultimately it would be found that the other animal is kachusha. Odilma basar ma'asav azlinan, or maybe we follow what actually happened. What actually happened was that was kachusha, and when that animal is kachusha, it renders the person not liable for the second animal. So which one do we follow? Do we follow intention, or do we follow what ultimately happened? And the Gemara continues, Amar Lei said to him, Lav hainu de Rabba v'Rava. Isn't this issue, isn't it subject to a machlokas, or it's discussed, we should say, between Rabba and Rava, this issue that's being raised right now? This was Ravashi's response. Where do we see Rabba and Rava on this issue? The Itmar, because it was stated as follows, Shama shetava tinok bayom. Let's say a person heard that there's a child drowning in the sea. Uparas mitzuda lahalos dagim, and so then he spreads a trap, and this would be a violation of Shabbos to be hunting, to be trapping. He spreads the trap in order to get fish. Vehela dagim, and then he brings up fish. So his intention is to commit an isser, and he actually does commit an isser. So then chayev, then he's liable. Then there's obviously nothing to talk about. But lahalos dagim, but let's say he does it in order to get the fish. Vehela dagim vitinok, but then he ends up saving the child as well. He gets the fish and the child as well. And so here we have a machlokas amuroim. Rava amar chayev. Rava says in this case he would be liable, even though what he did ultimately he saved the child, but still he's going to be liable. Rabba amar pater. And Rabba says in this case, since he saved the child, which would be permitted, of course, so therefore pater he is exempt. The adkan Rabba loka pater. Now when Rabba says pater over here, he only says exempt. Elakevon de shama. It's only because since he heard that there was a tinok, that was the case. Shama shatava tinok b'yom. So amrino nami daite atinok. So we actually say that his intention must have been for the tinok as well, and that's why he's exempt. That's why he gets out of it. Avolo shamalo, but let's say he didn't hear at all. He knew nothing about the tinok. So then it would seem that everybody actually would agree that he's liable. And the Gemara now in this version is essentially suggesting that according to both Rava and Rabba, even though Rabba says pater in the case of the tinok, but Rabba would actually say chayiv. He would actually say liable in the case of the kachusha, where the person has no idea that the animal was a kachusha. That's what the Gemara is suggesting right now. Again, that there would be liability because his intention was to do something that there was liability for. The fact that ultimately it came out okay doesn't really make a difference. We follow the intention. The Gemara continues with another version of understanding how to derive it from Rabba and Rava. V'ika d'yamri, some say as follows, Amar lehainu plugsayu de Rabba v'Rava. He said to him, that is the machlokus between Rabba and Rava. In other words, according to the first version, it's lav hainu de Rabba v'Rava. It's actually following from both Rabba and Rava we can determine the answer. But now we're saying it's subject to the machlokus of Rabba and Rava. The Itmar, because it was stated, Shama shatava tinok bayom. There's a discussion about the exact girsa over here. We'll see Rashi in a moment. But Shama shatava tinok bayom. He heard that a child was drowning in the sea. Uparas mitzuda lahalos dagam. And again, he spread out the trap in order to get the fish. Vehela dagam, and he brought up the fish. So chayiv, he is going to be liable. Lahalos dagam, if he does it again to bring up the fish. Vehela tinok v'dagam, and he brings up the child and the fish. Rabba amar pater. Rabba says pater, v'Rava amar chayiv, and Rava says chayiv. And in this version, again, we're saying that it actually is subject to this machlokus. Rabba amar pater, the reason why Rabba says exempt, zil basar ma'asav, you have to go after what actually happened. What happened in the end was he did something that was perfectly permissible, therefore he's exempt. V'Rava amar chayiv, but Rava says he's liable, zil basar machshavta, you have to follow his intention. His intention here was to violate the Shabbos, and therefore he is going to be liable. And Rashi explains, Shachat b'Shabbos beis chatos shel tzibur. Again, he slaughters on Shabbos 2 chatos that are communal. Could go echad min sirei avodah zarah. For example, it could be the sirei avodah zarah, sirei regel, or it could be the goats of the regel of the holiday that falls out b'Shabbos, that falls out on Shabbos shebesocha regel, which is in the holiday. So again, he slaughters 2. There was only a need for 1. Chayiv al hashniya. He's liable on the second chatos. He's chayiv to bring a chatos. The shogeg, who now he's considered shogeg. He's not considered mazed over here. He's considered that he did it by mistake. That's why he has to bring a chatos. Kasavar mutter l'shochtem Shabbos. He thinks that it was mutter, permissible to slaughter it on Shabbos. Hoel v'shel tziburu. Since it's communal, he thought it's permissible. V'tav, he made a mistake. To kavan to shachar rishon. Once he slaughtered the first one, sulo chazi hayla tzibur. Even if 2 animals were designated, but once he slaughtered the first one, the second one is no longer fit to be a communal offering. V'afilu nischaber b'shniya. And then the statement went on to say, even if ultimately the kapara was from the second animal. Kagon shenishbach dam harishona. For example, the blood spilled of the first animal. La'achar shchita shniya. After the slaughtering of the second animal. There you have an argument to say that he's totally potter. Misham de kamaisa bereshus shachat, because the first one, that was slaughtered with permission, because at the beginning, originally the idea was to use the first one. Afagav de sof lo keeper, even though in the end that was not the one that provided the atonement. Ela b'shniya was the second one. Ushniya nami, we could argue the second one also. Hoelu ba keeper, since ultimately that was the atonement, lifter olem, maybe one should be exempt. But afilu nevertheless, chayiv ashniya potter rishon. We say he's chayiv on the second one, he's exempt on the first one, the bas or shchita azli, and we follow the shchita. At the time of the shchita, the second one was a shchita that was not permitted. Afilu nimsa sarishona kechusha, and then it said, even if the first one is lean, kodem shchita shniya, let's say it was found to be lean before slaughtering the second one, v'ika misham hakriveu nolafechasecha, so therefore that's a problem, because the pasuk says, would you bring that to your governor? That's not a proper offering. V'shachat shniya, so he slaughtered the second one, chayiv, he is liable in such a situation, even though it's certainly not preferred to bring the kechusha, he's going to be liable. Lefanav b'Shabbos, again, it's in front of him on Shabbos. V'lo ela afilu lechatchila. Now again, we brought this is part of the second statement that we bring from Rabbah, that the Gemara says, not only that, even lechatchila, let's say one is kechusha and one is shmeina, omrim lo liachar shchitas kechusha, we would actually say to him after he slaughters the kechusha, the lean one, we would say, have shmeina lechatchila v'shachat lechatchila. Now, even though you already slaughtered the kechusha, but bring the shmeina lechatchila, and you can slaughter it, and from that statement of Rabbah, and again, that was talking about on Shabbos, as Rashi just mentioned, from that statement of Rabbah, so again, it certainly seems that the kechusha is a reason, the fact that one is a kechusha is a reason to get out of liability on the shmeina. And so the Gemara answered, Sami kechusha mimilsa kamaisa de Rabbah, just take out the kechusha part of the original statement of Rabbah. Viboy say maha kamaisa Rabbi Ami omra, or you could say that that first statement was really Rabbi Ami v'sami Rabbah mine, just take Rabbah out, he never made that first statement. And then the Gemara asked, b'fnei me'ayin, let's say you have a situation where it's kechusha, but it's not recognizably kechusha, it's in the intestines. Mitchilo hayanira shmein, it really looked like it was a fat animal. V'hashtu de mishtakach kechusha, but now it's found it was really kechusha. Umeikar kishachet l'shniya. Now originally when he slaughtered the second animal, lo shachta b'reshus, he didn't have permission to slaughter that. To hadayin lo nimsas rishona kechusha, we didn't yet know that the first one was kechusha. So now what's the halacha? V'aliba de Rabbah kami boila. Now this question is according to Rabbah. De pater heicha de nimsas rishona kechusha kodem shniya. Again, he said if you found it to be kechusha before the second, then you're exempt. So hachamai. So here it's being found out after. What would be the halacha? Li surah kamechavin. Do we follow the fact that his intention was for iser? Kishachat shniya l'milsa kamechavin da'adayin lo noda lo kechishas rishon. Again, when he slaughtered that second one, so he was really doing something that he understood to be aser. He didn't know the first one was a kechusha yet. Highly surah yichavin lavdafka doesn't necessarily mean that he wanted to commit an iser. To hashogeg savar mutter lasos. He is still a shogeg. It was a mistake. He thought it was mutter hoel v'shel tzibur because he thought it was communal. Elo l'shchita asur echavin. The point is that he was having intention for a slaughtering that is ultimately aser. Or basar ma'isa. Maybe we follow what actually happened. Vigloi lamafreya deshaber of it. Turns out retroactively he did the right thing. And again, we had two versions of whether it's following Rab and Rava for the answer or it's a machlokas Rab and Rava of the answer. The first version, lav hainu de Rava v'Rava, isn't this Rab and Rava? Kolomar, meaning letarvayu chayiv. According to this first version, according to both Rab and Rava, we should say chayiv in this case. The basar machshav azlina, we do follow intention. The adkan lo pater Rava elakevan deshama shetava tinok. Rava only said pater since he heard that the tinok, that the child was drowning. We can make the argument that he's thinking about the tinok as well. well. And then in the second version, Lav Hainu Pluksayu, it's subject to the machlokus of Rab and Rava. Kolomar l'Rabba Potter l'Rava Chayiv. There the Gemara is saying, according to Rabba, we would say exempt, because ultimately everything turned out okay. According to Rava Chayiv, Hai Shochit, the slaughterer, the time of the Rabba de Potter, Lav Misham de Shama, because according to the second version, the reason why Rabba says exempt is not because he heard there was a Tinok, Ela Mishum does Linan Basar Maisav. Now the Gemara is arguing that Rabba says exempt because we follow what ultimately happened. V'hu adin afilu lo shama. The same would be true even if he didn't hear about a tinok. V'hai did not got shama. Now the reason in this second version it still said shama, that he heard the tinok that was drowning. The reason why it says that's lashmin, and that's just to teach us the afilu shama, that even if he heard there was a tinok, kihela dogim below tinok chayev. If he brings a fish with no tinok, then he is going to be chayev. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rabba says. Some have the gears of Rava over here. Amar Rava says chola shamdu legrogres achas. Let's say you have a sick individual and they estimate that he needs one dried fig in order to heal. V'rotzu asar b'nei adam v'heviu, and then 10 people, they go running and they each bring a dried fig, and the assumption over here is they violate Shabbos in some way by bringing that fig. V'heviu asar grogros b'vasachas, and let's say they bring the 10 dried figs all at once, so Paturin, they're going to be exempt. Each individual is trying to save this person, and they're doing something essentially that is permitted, and therefore they are all exempt. And the Gemara continues and says, Afilu b'zachar zeh, this is true actually, even if it's not b'vasachas, even if they bring it one after the other, they're still all exempt. And afilu kadam v'hivri b'rishon, even if right away he healed himself with the first one, and now the other people are coming and bringing the grogros again, since their entire intention is to save him, so they are going to be exempt in this situation. And the Gemara continues, boy, Rava asks the following question, Chola shamdu l'shtei grogros, let's say there's a sick individual, they estimate that he needs 2 grogros. V'yesh shtei grogros b'shtei uksin, and now there are some options. There are 2 grogros that are attached to two different stems that would involve violating Shabbos 2 times to take it off. V'shalosh b'oketz achas, but then there's 3 that are attached to 1 stem, which would be just 1 violation, but taking more than we need. So ha'minayu maisinan, so which one do we bring? Shtayim maisinan dechazule, do we just bring the 2 because that's what he needs? Odilma shalosh maisinan dekamemata katsira, maybe the 3 is what should be brought because we're lessening the amount of harvesting. And the Gemara continues and says, Pshita tzavi is shalosh maisinan, that we should bring the 3. And Rashi explains, chola sha'amdu legrogros, again you have a chola, they estimate he needs a grogros, v'im yochel achas yirafe, he'll heal with 1. V'afilu b'zechar zeh, even if they come one after the other, they're all exempt. Tekulan l'mitzvah nischavnu, they were all intending to do a mitzvah, petur, and they are pater, dehazar is l'chola meshubach, the more a person is zariz for a sick individual, the more he takes action, the better. We don't want people to hold back from taking action. Oketz is zonav shutolabo, the oketz is essentially the stem that it is hanging from. To come in mayit kitzira, again, if he takes the one with 3, he's actually doing less kitzira. Dein kotzer latlisha achas, he's only doing 1 detachment, that's only 1 act of kitzira. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Dalid Amid Beis.